Good morning, Shavua Tov. This week we will be studying the Parsha of Re'eh. In the Parsha of Re'eh, amongst other things it discusses, is the mitzvah of tzedakah, which is what we'll be talking about today. The concept of giving tzedakah, of course, is something that is very much rooted in one of the core values of the Jewish people throughout history. And that's what we need to analyze today. We know when it comes to giving money, to giving tzedakah, money is something that is very, very much deeply rooted in the person and everything that they work hard for. It's something that, at the end of the day, the whole world associates money with happiness, with satisfaction. Ultimately, you could pretty much buy anything, acquire anything with money, and people, a whole day, they're working for that. That's their obsession. So the challenge we have every single day, people approach us and they ask us to put our hands in our pocket and to part with that money that we worked so hard for. And we need to understand why. Why should a person who worked day and night to acquire this hard-earned money, to give it off to somebody who, for whatever reason, they're down, they're out, not successful, why should I part with my money? In fact, when we analyze in this week's Parsha, at the end, when it talks about the Yom Tov of Shavuos, during the holidays we should be inviting over guests, it uses two interesting terms. It says that Vasisa Chag Shavuos LaHashem Elokecha, you should celebrate the holiday of Shavuos. And it says, Misas Nidvas Yadcha Tite. You should give you should donate, contribute that which is within your means. So it uses the term Nidvas, which is a nadava, a donation. Then, subsequent to that, at the end of the parsha, it says, Ish kematnas yodo. Each person should give matnas yodo, which the word matana is a gift. So we have two terms when the Torah describes when we should be sharing with those who are less fortunate. There's nedava, a donation, matana, a gift. These are two very, very different and fundamentally different approaches when it comes to giving from one person to the other. Nedava, a contribution, which is a donation, that implies that really the giver doesn't have to do it. It's not something that's obligatory. It's a nedava. It's a voluntary donation. He does it out of the goodness of his heart, the generosity to share with a person who is less fortunate. Matana, the Talmud says that who do you give a gift to? You don't just give gifts to random people that you don't know. Generally speaking, the recipient has done something for you. And therefore, as an appreciation, some recognition, you give them that gift. So we have two fundamentally different concepts. A gift is something that is by right, something that the recipient earned. Whereas the nadava, the contribution by donation, is something that is out of the righteousness and out of the compassion of the giver. And in general, when a person gives a gift, there's a passion and enthusiasm. They wrap it up. They make it look nice, presentable. When they give it, there's an enthusiasm. There's an excitement when they're giving the gift. A donation is not necessarily the case. You're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. It doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it in the most passionate and enthusiastic way. So why does the Torah, when it sort of talks about the manner in which a person bestows upon the less fortunate, there is a term of nedava, which implies something that is voluntary. And then there's the matana, the gift, which is a totally different notion. In general, the concept of tzedakah is very much related to the times that we're living in right now. As the Parsha of Re'eh, this week we'll be reading the Shabbos before Elul. The month of Elul is very much connected to the concept of tzedakah. It's brought in many of the many svarim and many commentators that the idea of tzedakah, tzedakah, the Rambam mentions it. Tzedakah is fundamental. It's a customary to increase in the giving of tzedakah, because just like when we share with our wealth, with our fortune, with another person, even though they may not seem to deserve it or earn it, it's out of the goodness of our heart. We go beyond what is required. We show compassion and mercy on the less fortunate. So to Hashem, in the month of Elul, he should, when he judges us, he should have rachmanas, he should have compassion and mercy, and even though we may not be worthy, to give us that special year that we ask for, the Shana Tova Mesuka. So, not to get everyone scared that it's already we're preparing for Rosh Hashanah, but there's a concept of tzedakah that's very much connected to the month of Elul. In fact, we know that the month of Elul, the word Elul is a Rosh Tevis, it's an acronym for various concepts, and one of them is Ish L'Re'eyu U'Matanas Lavyonim. In the word Elul is alluded the mitzvah of tzedakah, which on Purim, one of the mitzvahs is to give gifts to the poor, and that is connected to the concept of tzedakah. In fact, the Rebbe once discussed this idea, and he asked the question, it's strange, we would call Matanas Lavyonim, which is essentially charity, it's essentially giving tzedakah, yet the term we use is Matanas Lavyonim, gifts to the poor. Why don't we call it tzedakah la'aniyim, charity to the poor, nedava la'aniyim, a contribution to the poor? Why do we use the term gift? Especially in light of the way we explained before, that gift is something that the person, the recipient, has done something to curry favor, to earn your gift. Why would we term Matanas Lavyonim matana, a gift? So before we explain these questions about tzedakah, in this parsha, it discusses specifically the scenario, ki yih b'cha evyon, if you will have amongst your brethren a person who is downtrodden, a pauper. The Torah says you should not harden your heart, you should not clench your fist. Pasoach tiftach, you should open and you should increasingly give tzedakah and share with your less fortunate brethren. In this parsha, it gives us the mitzvah of tzedakah. And we know that the mitzvah of tzedakah is something that is not just another mitzvah. In fact, it's a vehicle, it's a channel for tremendous blessing in our lives. In fact, it's brought that the mitzvah of tzedakah is a channel for parnasa. Through giving tzedakah, we can create new channels of wealth and fortune in our lives. It's brought in the Gemara, in the Tractate of Tainus, that Rabbi Yochanan, he was asking this child, he said, tell me, what have you learned in school? And he said, there's a verse that says, Aser to Aser, tithe you shall tithe. And he asked, why does it say the word tithe twice? So he explained, Rabbi Yochanan explained that Aser b'shvil shetis Asher. The Talmud is the pasuk is teaching us that you should tithe in order shetis Asher. Not, it doesn't just mean tithe, but like from the word ashiros, which means wealth and fortune, that through giving tzedakah, you will become more affluent. And the child says, hang on, this is not, are we supposed to, this is like a test or something? And I thought we're not supposed to be testing Hashem. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no, this is actually the one place where the verse says, Malachi, ubachanuni bezos, you should test me with this, v'arikosi lachem bracha ad blidai, that in this, when it comes to giving tzedakah, you should test me. You give the tzedakah and you will see an overflowing abundance of blessings from Hashem. the truth also is that it works the other way as well. If giving tzedakah creates a channel for blessing, when a person doesn't give tzedakah, it chas v'shalom has the opposite effect as well. The Talmud in the Tractate of Kesubos tells us about the story of the sages who observed there was this woman who appeared to be exceptionally poor, abject poverty, and they saw her rummaging through the dung of an animal, of a carcass of an animal, and she found undigested barley in the carcass of the animal, in the dung of the animal. And that's what she was subsisting on. That's all she had. And they asked her, my daughter, what's your story? What's your name? And she says, I am the daughter of Nakdiman ben Gurion, who was a fabulously wealthy person, which we know about from in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Many stories connected to him. And here she is, without a penny to her name, looking through the rubbish, through the garbage, to be able to feed herself. And they said, what happened? What happened to all the wealth that your father had? And she said, there's a famous aphorism from the Yerushalmis that say, Mamayin melach chaser, that money needs salt. Different explanations what it means, but one of them is that if you want to preserve, just like salt, you want to preserve your money, so chaser, sometimes you have to diminish a little bit to increase it. The tzedakah is what preserves your wealth and your fortune. So here we have a scenario. They asked her, hang on a second, didn't your father give enough tzedakah? Didn't he give tzedakah? But she said, yes, indeed, my father did give tzedakah, but not commensurate to the amount he was able to give. So here, even though her father gave tzedakah, since he had the capacity to give more and he didn't, he was judged by that and the fortune was lost. So we see it goes both ways. The giving of tzedakah creates new opportunity, new parnasa. And chas v'shalom, if it doesn't, then it diminishes. And this needs explanation. Why is that? Why do we say that giving tzedakah will increase? What's the correlation? You're giving tzedakah, it increases your parnasa, increases your blessings in your life, and if you don't, Hashem takes it away. What's the connection? In fact, the Rebbe explains that this is not just in a case where a person has the means to give tzedakah, whereby giving the tzedakah will further increase the blessings and parnasa in their life, even if a person is in a position where they don't have the means. So you have every excuse not to give. Through giving tzedakah, you will actually create the reality, you'll create the situation where you have the vessel for brachas. He mentioned the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, where his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, wanted to print the responsa, the tshuvas of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he called in a person and asked him to take upon himself to contribute the funds needed to print the responsa of the Tzemach Tzedek. And the person said, okay, I will do it. I'll take it upon myself. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said at that time, this person did not have the ability, did not have the financial means to contribute to cover this undertaking. It was way beyond. However, once he took it upon himself to pay for this undertaking, for the printing of the tshuvas, all of a sudden he became a very, very wealthy person. And then he had the means to pay for it. So in this story, the Rebbe says, we see that sometimes you're in a situation where it doesn't seem possible, but the very resolution, the determination to give the tzedakah, that creates new avenues, new opportunities, new possibilities. And you totally transform yourself to the extent that even though initially you did not have the means to give the tzedakah, Hashem creates that bracha, which you then are able to do so, and even more than you could have imagined. I read about a Farbrengen, it was Yutes Kislev, in the 1960s, I believe 1968, the Rebbe was talking about in the Kfar Chabad. They were building a new section, a new neighborhood, and they were raising some funds towards that project. And the Rebbe told everyone to write down on a piece of paper how much they were going to contribute to this new venture. And everyone wrote their amount, and they passed up their letters to the Rebbe. The Rebbe looked at all of them, and he sent it back, and he says everyone should increase their contribution, because whatever they give, Hashem will give them back. As it says, Aser to Aser, that when you give, you will become wealthy, and therefore, whatever you give, you will receive fourfold. The Rebbe says that means if a person is going to contribute $1,000, you should contribute $4,000. And each person they gave in, the Rebbe said, add double, triple. There was one person, the Rebbe said he should give 200 times that he wrote down on the paper. In any case, there was one individual who I believe wasn't even a Lubavitcher Chassid. He wrote down on his paper, he wrote $500. And the Rebbe rejected that amount, and then he upped it to 1,000. It still wasn't good. It kept on going up until he wrote $4,000, and the Rebbe accepted it. And then he was thinking in his mind, okay, this is way beyond anything he could afford. This is in the 1960s, and in general, it was just an astronomical figure. And he's thinking to himself how he's going to pay it off. Maybe he'll give some post-dated checks and whatnot. And immediately the Rebbe said, those who are thinking, who are planning on leaving before Shabbos, they have to make sure to go to the maskiras, to the secretariat, and they should pay off the entire amount before Shabbos. So what should he do? He had to leave. He wrote out a check, and then afterwards he went to. He was going to go back to. He was from Eretz Yisrael. He was going to go back to Eretz Yisrael. He went through Antwerp. He went to Belgium, and there he met an acquaintance of his. It was on the Friday, and he met an acquaintance of his, and the person says, "Look, I just got these unpolished, these rough diamonds have come to me, and I want to know what this person was in the diamond business, so I wanted to hear what your opinion is on this." So he was looking it over, and he says, "I think this is good stuff. It's good merchandise." So his friend tells him, "I'm thinking maybe to buy it, but on condition that you're going to go in partnership with me. We're going to go 50-50. So he said, "Okay, I agree to that. However, I don't have the money with me right now. I'm going to go to Israel, and I'll wire you the funds when I get there." So he goes off to Israel, and it's after Shabbos, and he sends him a telegram and says, "Tell me, how much money do I owe you for my portion of this investment?" His friend sends him back a telegram saying, "You don't have to pay me anything because I already sold this, and I sold it for a tremendous profit." And a little while later, he got a detailed accounting of what was made on this transaction, and his friend writes that they made on this investment $32,000, of which 50% would go to him, which is 16,000, which is precisely 4 times the amount of the 4,000 tzedakah that the Rebbe told him to give, which at the Hebrein the Rebbe said, you will be making 4 times the amount. In any case, clearly, the giving of tzedakah is a vessel. It's a vehicle through which we receive tremendous brachas. In fact, we know that when in the parsha of Teruma, the pasuk tells us v'yikchu li teruma, when Hashem asks the Bnei Yisrael to contribute towards the fundraising drive of the Mishkan. It says v'yikchu li teruma, they should take for me a contribution. And the famous question is asked, why did it say v'yikchu, you should take? You have to give your contribution. You don't take your contribution. And the idea here is that by giving, you're actually taking. Because ultimately, more than what is gained by you, by the recipient receiving your contribution, you gain even more. The Chafetz Chaim once gave an analogy. There was once this farmer who came to the marketplace with his sacks of wheat, and he found a customer who was willing to buy his whole stock. He had many, many sacks of wheat, and what they decided, since it was they had to count it all up, this merchant said that they would start counting each sack, and for each sack, he would place 1 coin in a dish, And like this, once they finish counting up all the sacks, for each coin, they would know that represents an entire sack, and he would have to pay. Let's say each sack was 100 coins, so for each coin, it would represent 100 coins. And therefore, he starts counting, and each bag he's placing a coin in the dish, and the pile starts to grow. And the farmer is looking at this, and he's getting very envious. He's seeing piles of coins, and as the merchant is counting the bags, and he keeps on putting in coins, when he wasn't looking, he starts taking a few of the coins and he puts them in his pocket, because here there's money sitting in front of him. Chafetz Chaim says, what a fool this farmer is, because ultimately here he is coming and taking a few coins to put in his pocket. He thinks he's making money, but these coins, each one really represents an entire sack, which is worth many, many times more than what he's taking. So here he thinks he's taking a coin and he's putting it in his pocket, he's making some money, but really he's losing a tremendous amount. And similarly, he says there are those, they have an opportunity to share of their assets with another person, and they refuse to do so. They don't want to help those who are less fortunate. They think they're saving money. Really, they're saving pennies, but they're really maybe penny smart, but dollar foolish, because when you give, it's v'yichlu, you're really taking. So that's the question. Why? Why, through giving tzedakah, does that create that kind of blessing in our life? And in the reverse, when a person doesn't give, Hashem takes away. And what does this have to do with the fact that we call tzedakah matana, as a gift, as we mentioned before? So they tell the story of the Apter Rebbe, Ram Yeshua Heschel of Apt. He, once a chassid of his came into him and asked him for a blessing. He said, my daughter is about to get married to a wonderful, handsome chassid. However, we have no money. We are not able to make the wedding. So right away, the Rebbe takes an ink and a parchment, and he writes a letter to one of his chassidim who was of some means, and he wrote in the letter he needs him to give this fellow chassid who is in a very, very tough situation. He wants to marry his daughter. If he could please give him 300 rubles. The chassid gets this letter and he says, wow, this is a lot of money. I'm going through a very, very tough time. So he decides he needs to help out, but this is way beyond his ability to give. So the chassid gives him 100 rubles. He says, here you go. Bracha v'atzlacha, much success and mazel tov. And he sends him on his way. Chassid was a little bit dejected. He thought he was going to get the Rebbe sending him to this chassid, and he's going to give him the amount. So he goes back to the Rebbe and he tells him what happened. So the Rebbe takes the letter and he writes a new letter to another chassid. And he says, please, here's a fellow chassid. Please help him out. He wants to make a wedding. Please help him out with 300 rubles. So he takes the letter. He goes back to the other chassid, and that person really didn't have the means, but the Rebbe is asking, please, to step up and help a fellow Jew out. And he reaches deep and he gives the full amount to this chassid. Within a short period of time, this second chassid who gave the full amount for the wedding started to succeed and flourish and do even better, and he became exceedingly wealthy. This other chassid, the first one, who opted not to give the full amount, slowly but surely made one mistake after another, and slowly things started to unravel. And before he knew it, he was totally in a whole different situation. He was mamish a pauper. He had nothing. But he understood this was very much connected to the event that happened a little while earlier. He knew that the Rebbe was involved in this whole mishap and this whole debacle. So he goes to his Rebbe, the Apter Rebbe, and he says, I want to take you to a Din Torah. I am going to take you to Beis Din, because before this whole story, before I knew you, before I knew anything about this chassid was coming to me with a letter and a wedding, I was doing okay. And I gave a very substantial and generous contribution. And all of a sudden, before I know it, I lost everything. And I know you are involved, had something to do with you. And therefore, I want it back. So they go to the Bezdin and they say, the Rebbe, no, what's your position? What happened over here? The Rebbe said, let me explain you something. As we know, every person, 40 days before they're born, there are certain determinations that are made in heaven. Who will be rich, who will be poor among them. And it was decided that my neshama would come down to this world and I would be a wealthy person. However, I objected. I said, I have a lot to do in this world. I have to teach. I have to study. I have to counsel people. There's a lot of work to do, and I don't have time to run businesses and manage my assets and all kinds of things. So it was decided that I would be the rich person, but they would take a big chunk of this wealth and distribute it amongst a few key people. And they would be my bankers. And whenever I need to make a withdrawal, whenever I need some of those funds, I would go to my bank, I would go to my few people and take the money. And that's what I do every time a situation comes up. A person has a chasana, a person has a certain predicament. I go to one of my people and I say, please, I make a withdrawal from my account. And that's how things have been for a while. So long that my bankers are trustworthy and they are following the rules. So then I make my deposits and then I make my withdrawals. I stay with these bankers. However, when I see that one of my bankers loses their trustworthiness and they forget and they think that the money really belongs to them, I need to find another banker. I need to find somebody else where I could keep my money in a very safe and secure place. This is one of the fundamental ideas when it comes to tzedakah. Hashem created a world where there are givers and there are takers. And everything, the whole world works this way. Whether it's in the ecosystems, in biology, in every aspect of life, there are things that give and there are things that take. And in this world, there's no one person that only gives and doesn't take. There's not just when it comes to finances. It could be wisdom, it could be kindness, it could be love, advice. There are so many things that each and every one of us, sometimes we need to take, but sometimes we have to give. And Hashem wanted that this world should exist in this way, where we are sensitive, kind, and empathetic to each other. That in a case of need, when a person needs something, we share with them, we give to them. And ultimately, in this system where there are givers and takers, it's only because Hashem set it up that way, which means when Hashem gives the rich person more money than the poor person, what really happens here is that Hashem knows that every single person, how much they need. How much they need to survive, how much they need to enjoy their life, perhaps. What Hashem does is He gives to certain individuals more than they actually need. Because the idea is that He's really giving to the poor person, but He gives it through the agency of the wealthy and the affluent. So the money that they have is not really theirs. They're merely custodians. They're merely holding on to the funds in order they should give it to the rightful owner. And that's why, from that perspective, it's a matana, it's really a gift, meaning it belongs to the poor person. In fact, the rich person should actually be thankful to the poor person because the money that went to him was only due to the fact that it really belongs to the poor person. So the poor person actually had to go through a very humbling and humiliating process where he has to ask the rich person for the money. So the rich person should thank the less fortunate person because he is in a situation where he has to take instead of giving. So Hashem, of course, looks at this. And what happens is, it's very simple. If you give the tzedakah, that is why it becomes a vehicle, a channel for more blessing. Because Hashem looks at every single person. And if you share the excess, the funds that actually belong to this other person, so Hashem looks at his fellow children and he sees one person giving to another person. What happens here? What's happening here is you're demonstrating that you're a trustworthy, credible, reliable banker. And therefore Hashem says, oh, I see that the money that I give him, he's actually sharing with that person. So I can continue to give more because he will share that. So giving will actually beget more receiving. You'll get more funds to share. If, God forbid, a person receives more than they need, but they choose not to share, pass it on to the rightful owner, Hashem sees that this person is not a good custodian. This person is not reliable. They're not doing the responsibly and morally correct thing to do. So Hashem says, oy, how could I give this person if it's not going to go to its rightful place? So he looks for other banks. He looks for other places where he could deposit the funds in a reliable place. Thus, the Rebbe would talk about the word tzedakah, which many translate as charity, as a mistranslation, a misinterpretation of the real word, because the word charity implies that the money belongs to the giver. It is out of the kindness and the goodness, the generosity that they share with that person. But the true definition of tzedakah is tzedek. It is the right thing. It's just. That is the proper thing to do, to give it to the poor person. In fact, the Rebbe once spoke about a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name was Reb Tzadok, who would go from town to town and do all kinds of work to be able to raise the funds. He always struggled, but he always knew that if he somehow came across some extra income that was unexpected, he knew right away that there must be at his home a shadar, some fundraiser, or the Alter Rebbe must have sent a letter to his home raising money for the kuppah of Rab Meir Baal HaNes. There was a tzedakah that he would raise funds for Eretz Yisrael. He knew right away that the money was to be given to tzedakah. And the Rebbe said that it's interesting because this chassid intuitively knew that this extra funds that he got wasn't for him. It was the Alter Rebbe was orchestrating all of these events that he should get the funds in order to give it to somebody else. And the Rebbe says, hang on a second. If the Alter Rebbe wanted the funds to go to those people who were raising funds, or for his kuppah, for the Rab Meir Baal HaNes, why didn't he just arrange the funds to go direct? Why did he arrange that he orchestrates Reb Tzadok? He should get some extra funds, and then he gives that to those people. And the Rebbe said an interesting thing. The Talmud said, "Tzadikim domim laboram," that the righteous imitate, they mimic their creator. And just like Hashem, what does Hashem do? He doesn't give directly the funds to the poor person. You created a society where there are the haves and the have-nots. But he does that to give a special schus to the givers, to the rich people, that they should have the schus of passing it on to the poor people. And in a similar way, the Alter Rebbe empowered his Hasidim to receive an extra few dollars in order to pass that on to those who need it. But the truth is, it only at the outset, it truly and rightfully belonged to the people who didn't have any money. It's brought down in the Gemara that there's in a scenario where a person is about to pass on, and he writes in his will that all of his assets should go to one of his children. Everything, and nothing should go to the rest. So there's a presumption that what the father really intended was not that all of his assets should only go to one kid. Rather, that he should become what the Talmud calls an apotropos, a custodian, a guardian. So essentially this person would be the executor of his estate, but the intent is clearly that not all the funds should just go to him, but this person would be in charge of distributing and dispensing the funds to everyone else. Because it is illogical to entertain a notion that a father would give all of his assets to one kid and not share it to everybody else. And in a similar way, Hashem, there's no way he would decide that there's a few key people in the world that all the wealth will go to them, and everyone else should just be needy and go through life and struggle and suffer. Essentially, what he did was, in the will, so to speak, he gave a few people the money, but it wasn't that they should keep the money. They're just the custodians. They are the executors who have the ability to evenly and fairly distribute the funds to everybody else. But not that the person should think everything that I have is truly mine. And therefore, the Rebbe says the Torah uses two terms: misas nidvas yadcha, that on the one hand we look at tzedakah as a nedava, as a voluntary contribution. Then there's a term we said, ish kamatnas yado. There's the matana, there's the gift. And we asked, seemingly these two seem to contradict each other. Is tzedakah a donation, a contribution, or is it a gift? And the Rebbe explains that these are two phases. They're talking about two types of people. You have the person who doesn't have much in their life. They have very, very little. They don't have the ability to give a lot of tzedakah. They could barely eke out a living on their own. On this we say, misas nidvas yadcha, give whatever you can. In fact, we know that the Torah requires that even the poor people should give tzedakah. This is an essential requirement for every single person. But since that person doesn't have much, whatever they give is essentially a nedava. But once the person gives the tzedakah and they create the channel to bring more bracha into their life, then it's ish kamat nas yado. Now you come to the realization that every single person you have to share. You have to share of your wealth. And thus you shouldn't feel that giving is going to in any way diminish, because at the end of the day, whatever you're giving really rightfully belongs to that person. We know that when Moshe Rabbeinu, in the parasha of Kisisa, told all the Bnei Yisrael to give a machzah shekel, and the Rashi brings the midrashic explanation that Moshe Rabbeinu had some difficulty about the machzah shekel, and it says that Hashem showed him a matbeya shel esh, a coin of fire. And many ask the question, what was so difficult for Moshe Rabbeinu to understand? And Hashem had to illustrate that through a fiery coin. And why a fiery coin specifically? And one of the explanations is that Moshe Rabbeinu was asking Hashem, here he's making a fundraiser, a drive to raise the funds for the Mishkan. How do you inspire people to give, to part with their wealth? So what does Hashem do? He shows him a matbeya shel esh, a coin of fire. What's the significance of the coin of fire? As we know, fire, if you light one candle from another candle, so then the fire is not diminished at all. You could light from one candle infinite amount of candles, and the fire still remains undiminished, undepleted. Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you have to teach your fellow brethren that when they give tzedakah, it's like fire. They're scared, they're nervous, their assets will become depleted. They'll look at their portfolio and it's going to go down by 10% from their meiser. They should realize it's like fire. Whatever you give, it will not be diminished at all. Thus, it says in the pasuk, it says v'nasnu. When you give tzedakah, the word v'nasnu means to give, and we know it's a word that could be read both ways, because when you give, you're ultimately receiving. In fact, we know that it's brought down that tzedakah tatzol mimaves, the power of tzedakah is so profound that it's able to save you from the most dire predicament. There was once there was the shliach in Brazil, Rabbi Whiteman. He had one of his supporters. So he came to the Rebbe, and on his behalf, this person wanted to make a donation. So he brought his pan and a check that he left with the maskiris, with the Rebbe. And a little while goes by, maybe a few weeks, and his supporter calls him and he says, "What's going on in Chabad? I didn't realize they don't cash their checks," because he made a contribution and he saw that the check never cleared yet. So he calls up to find what's going on, and a little while later, maybe a couple months, the check was eventually cashed. A little while later, this Rabbi Whiteman, he's going back to New York, and he takes again another pan, another note, another letter from his supporter as well, another check. And he says, I'm curious to see how long it's going to take this time for them to finally cash my check. And they were very, very surprised, but right away in the afternoon, the Maskiris, the Rebbe's secretariat, they sent out a receipt, a response to the person's pan, as well as a receipt, a charity receipt, which was an indication that they already went to the bank to cash the check, which was very surprising. The next morning, Rabbi Whiteman, he receives a phone call from his supporter who is in total distress and totally overwhelmed. He says, what's going on? He says, well, yesterday my father was walking out onto the street and he was hit by a car. And it was such a violent impact that he flew like 20 feet from the car. But when they called the ambulance and they checked him, he got away, was only a few bruises, and he was barely affected by the impact. He was barely injured, which was a tremendous miracle. And he's trying to understand what's going on. So Rabbi Whiteman has to tell me, when exactly did this happen? And they made the calculation that it happened at 8 p.m., which was 8 p.m., which when they calculated the time in New York, was exactly the time that they sent out the receipt and the check went to be cashed. Which from here, we see that here the Rebbe held out exactly the time that when the tzedakah had to go through, when it was needed. So we see that more than the giver, the person who dispenses the tzedakah, more than that the recipient gives. We think you give someone a donation, the recipient is very grateful, he's very thankful. More than it does for the recipient, it does for the giver. So the Rebbe explains, this is why on Purim, the tzedakah we give is called Matanos Levyonim. We ask the question, seemingly, Matanos Levyonim, it should be tzedakah laniyim. The Levyonim, Evyon, the word Evyon comes from the word a person who is ta'ev l'chol davar. The person is so poor that the person desires and craves anything. They have nothing in their lives. So we're talking about a person who is mamish, literally on the bottom of the food chain in terms of society. They have nothing to them. And here you're giving them a gift that should be called charity. Maybe tzedakah laniyim, nedava laniyim, as we asked. And the Rebbe explained the idea, as we mentioned, that this whole concept where there's givers and there's receivers is the system that Hashem created. But ultimately, every single person has a special task and a special mission. Throughout the year, the rich person, the giver, may feel that the money is that they're in a position to give, and the recipient feels humiliated, they feel insecure because they have to receive. However, on Purim, the Rebbe explained, Adela Yada, we are catapulted to a reality where each and every person could be cognizant of the fact that each and every one of us, the givers and the receivers, are both equal. The rich person looks at the poor person and comes to the realization that what I'm giving you is not just out of the kindness of my heart, it's my generosity, it's my contribution, it's really yours. On Purim, it's a special time, and that's why we give tzedakah, that it's brought down that whoever kol poshet yad nosen, whoever asks, we give, because we come to the realization that whatever we have truly belongs to this person. And when we make that demonstration, as we mentioned in the month of Elul, which we read the Parsha of Re'eh, that tzedakah is connected to this idea, and the Rosh Hashanah of Elul, Ish l'Re'ehu Matanos Levyonim, we demonstrate to Hashem that we realize that everything that we have, we give to others. We ask that Hashem as well, in return, view us in the same way, and not just when we ask for the Shana Tov Mesukah, we daven and we ask Hashem, He should be kind to us and generous. We should, by right, receive everything. As the Mishnah says, each Jew who is like a prince, and a princess. We deserve the best treatment. We deserve the best meal, the best lifestyle. We ask Hashem that He should give each and every one of us aksiva v'chesima tova, l'shana tova mesuka. We should have blessings in our lives. We should have health. We should have nachas from our children, parnasa, barachava, as much as we need. And the biggest bracha, the gula, mitzvah, vashlema, the ultimate redemption with the coming of Mashiach, b'mehera v'yameinu, amen.